All right, Ms. Guérot, it's wonderful to have you on the show. And my first question would be, what did Europe promise to be at its birth? And how has that promise been broken, in your opinion, or not been broken, in your opinion?
Well, the first thing would to answer, I mean, to ask what was the birth date? I mean, are we thinking about the 1930s, in which we had many people projecting a new Europe after World War II? Are we taking 1950 Jean Monnet for the birth of the modern Europe, or are we taking 92 Maastricht Treaty, political union, or are we going back in history? I mean, there's lots of medial research, basically, when the first sort of moment was in time when the word of Europe emerged. Yeah, I mean, obviously we know Europe is that princess, which were riding Zeus and giving the name to the continent. Zeus, and it's a very interesting story. This because the real question is: has the princess been seduced or violated by the taureau? Yeah. So is it a patriarchalic or a matriarchalic sort of thing we are talking about when we are talking about Europe? Yeah. But don't let me not evade too much. But the oldest map of Europe is from 1534. 1534, and it shows Europe in one map, the whole continent, as a woman and as a princess, beautiful. She lays. Basically, you need to imagine that Iberia, so Portugal, Spain, is the head with the crown going to the Atlantic, and then she is the whole continent, and one arm, the left arm goes to Great Britain, the right arm goes to Italy. Yeah. Then she has a huge dress, and the dress goes to Istanbul, by then Constantinople, and Russia. Yeah. So it's very interesting to see what the borders of Mrs. Europe, Mrs. Europe, Princess Europe have been. So what was she promising? What was she promising, Mrs. Europe? I mean, first she promised and she delivered Renaissance. After
Yeah.
the wars in the religious wars, Luther, Catholic Church, when the church unity fall into pieces, Protestants and Catholic, basically Res Publica Europea became the aim of unity of the continent, and that's why the dress of Mrs. Europe contains all people of Europe: Bulgaria, Grecia, Francia, Germania. They are all in Mrs. Europe, right? So I think she hold promise to a certain extent. It's, by the way, very interesting to see that the modern art, I mean, paintings throughout the centuries, yeah, when Europe was up like Renaissance, then Europe is painted, Mrs. Europe, it's always a woman, she's always painted on the taureau, and then she's, sitting and she's elegant and so, yeah. When Europe is in war, you look at Tizian, for instance, religious wars, yeah, then Mrs. Europe, she's down, normally holds the cue of the taureau and is somehow in the sand, and it's, like torture. She's, I mean, there is a clear momentum also in the 1930s. If you look at what, fascism and what happened in the 1930s, and you look at the paintings of Europe, yeah, you will see the same thing. So it's very interesting. There is a correlation between the promises of Europe, apparently as a civilization, as the arts, as something that relates to the truth and the beauty, and what we resent in terms of éclairage, revolution and so on and so forth. So everything which is connected in the theory of minds and political ideas with Europe, yeah, and that is the revolution, Marianne, 1989. That is workers' movements. That is the Les Beaux-Arts, la belle littérature, So, and she holds promise, yeah. So, if we look into more narrow time, what has been promised after, say, World War II? After World War II, it has been promised that Europe would be united. I remember, let's go back to the Manifesto of Ventotene, 41. There were Italian anti-fascists, Altiero Spinelli, who wrote in prison on an island in Italy, Ventotene. He wrote a very interesting manifesto, by the way, which you could read today, is still in the internet, Manifesto di Ventotene, which has a little, say, anti-capitalist, socialist sort of wording, which we are no longer familiar with. I know that younger people normally are shying away when they hear something like communism or socialism, or it's all bad, yeah. But interestingly, that the language was telling to people by then It's very interesting to realize that by then you would say socialism and people were cheering up, yeah, which means a society without competition, which means fair share, so it's very interesting in itself to see that today communism and socialism is totally out of the spirits and the minds, yeah, and it's tagged negatively, yeah, because it was tagged positively, just to say this. And so there was a promise of Europe being free, sovereign, being citizens-based, being democratic, being social, being East and West, yeah, because the manifesto of Ventotene hold the promise that East and West would be united. And it's 41, so it's before the war ended and it's before all these Stalin Iron Curtain sort of things appeared, yeah. And because you're in Swiss and doing a podcast, which I guess most young Swiss people are watching, there is a relay of Manifesto di Ventotene in the Hertensteiner Programm. Hertenstein was in September 1946, and Hertensteiner Programm was the idea of a citizen-based conference for a united Europe, in which people by then were thinking we go for a world federation. Yeah, and Europe should be one entity, one federated entity in this world federation, the World Cooperation Federation being clutched to United Nations. Yeah, so it's very interesting to see that only, say, 80 years back, people had these ideas. Today, you say federated Europe, oh, leave me alone, you know what, I mean, EU superstate, blah, blah, blah. But the Hertenstein program is very interesting. Why? Because it was citizens driven. It took place in a little village in Switzerland, Hertenstein, yeah, and there are still the 10 elements. It's the 10.
It's a fun fact. I grew up 5 minutes from there.
Ah, oh, that's it.
Yeah, yeah.
But you go to the internet and you Google or you chat GPT Hertensteiner Programm, you have the 10 baselines for a federated social and so on Europe, which is East, West, and so. And it's interesting, yeah, it was citizens driven and it was Swiss driven. For me, it's that important because you have all these elements of direct democracy and, European federation to which the Swiss, I think, would have loved to belong, yeah, because later the EU, Switzerland is a different relationship, yeah. But what is more interesting is that a couple of days after the Hertenstein program was drafted, that is when Churchill came to Zurich to do his very important speech, Let Europe Arise, in which he said, no, we don't do citizens' conferences and citizens' democracy, blah, 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 too complicated, lasts too long. We have urgency, there is the Iron Curtain and Stalin, blah, so we need the nation states to create a different Europe, which is became then the coal and steel community, and then the later on the European Union, based still on the nation states. Whereas the initial idea of Ventotene and of Hertenstein was to overcome the nation states mechanism, and in a way to go back to the old premise of Europe, all people in the dress of Mrs. Europe from 1534. Yeah, so I find this very interesting to go back to these ideas.
It's interesting. I didn't know that it goes back all the way to the 1500s. I really wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, the oldest map you can find in the internet. You just Google or ChatGPT oldest map. I have it in all my books. Yeah, so people could read my books. I have the map, but it was found in Retz, and Retz is in Lower Austria. So nearby Krems, which is one of the very ancient and very beautiful regions of Austria, by the way. Vigneron, white wine, many monasteries, and the Danube, And there, this map was found, by the way, in 2018. I inaugurated it, because I was professor not far away. So, and the map before was from 1585, and that's in the National Library of Vienna. But then more older is 1534, and that is in Retz, little town in Lower Austria.
It's interesting to kind of understand where it's coming from, how we ended up here, because today, I mean, my read on Europe, and it might be a Swiss, centric perspective, but I'm, for example, quite glad that Switzerland didn't join the EU, back then, because I don't know, today when I go to most European cities, it didn't get better the last 10 or 15 years. I remember going, I don't know, to Paris as a child, or to some beautiful cities in Germany as well, as a child, and it was beautiful. It was really, it was everything Europe should have been, and I don't know, in my very subjective, possibly, worldview, kind of something happened the last 10 or 15 years, whatever the right time frame might be, I don't know, that a lot of young people also that I speak to, they feel like, it's getting worse. Also my German friends, the ones I speak to, they say, yeah, quite frankly, we were kind of better off maybe, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, our
Yeah.
families as well. And I wonder, what is your read on that, like, because you're someone who really spent a lot of time, right? Well, as we saw now, going all the way back from the 1500s to today. And I'm really curious what you think about the current stage. Like, do you think it can be reformed? It can be made better, or does it need to change completely? Like, how do you see it these days?
Well, I mean, first, the idea of Europe that I tried to recast
Uh-huh.
has nothing to do with the current EU.
Uh-huh.
It's really two different things. Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
we normally talk about Europe and then we mean the EU, but the Europe I was talking about, that one emerging from the map, that merging, being united, being a woman, being about civilization, about something like, it's very important that this map, Europe,
Uh-huh.
looks to Russia,
Uh-huh.
doesn't, turn the head to look to Washington. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
She holds in the hand that goes to Italy, she holds den Reichsapfel, Res Publica, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So the Res Publica is republic, yeah, which is basically an anti-capitalist. La République
Uh-huh.
avoids to have too much money. It's not a political system in which money runs the world. Yeah. So it's
Uh-huh.
very important that she has this apple of Republik. What is the Republic? Yeah. And she looks to the Orient, Occident. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So it's very important to go back to this map, and it has nothing to do, but nothing with the European Union. And that is the problem, that we are
Uh-huh.
still in this sort of, messy time in which Gramsci would say, if the old can't go and the new is not yet there, we live in the times of the monsters. And that's certainly what we are living, because, my private bet is that the EU is in a way dead. I mean, it's not dead. Obviously, it's there and it acts and it does European Service Acts and whatever the EU does for these moments. Yeah. But it has no more support. If you go polling and you see the downgrade of citizens supporting the European Union, you see the resentment of the
Uh-huh.
so-called populist forces. Yeah, I don't like that term populist forces, because I think in many respects the so-called populists like Marine Le Pen or FPÖ or SVP or whoever, AfD, are right in criticizing the European technocracy. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
many of these so-called populist forces are not against Europe, but they are against the EU. And it's and it's also important to say that most of social scientists like me, yeah, I was in Wissenschaftszentrum Berlin and up and down in European social science, but most of the social scientists also say, look, the European Union does not correspond to our features of democracy, has been doing neoliberalization of the markets of all the EU member states, has been crashing societies, has been atomizing agricultural structures, has been destroying regions, autochthone regions like Bohemia, like Tyrol, like Savoyen, like Alsace, like Rhineland, and so on and so forth. So in a way, the European Union has been destroying the essence of what Europe, in the sense of this old map being integrated, being jolie, being, a civilization. The EU has destroyed Europe in a way. Yeah. So that would be a way to frame it. And if we are there, and if we could analyze this, then perhaps we can find escapes. I mean, finding escapes or finding solution is still a different question, because now then we would need to consider in which time of the world we are in, what is happening with the BRICS countries, what about the Chinese-American relation, what about the Russian-European relations, is Europe still catching up with technologies, and if so, which technologies, looking at AI, looking at China, looking at the Americas, whatever. Yeah. So there are many, many questions about if ever Europe would be able to analyze its core problem, if then it could overcome its problem, because there is also how to say, an analysis to make that it's perhaps too late. The past dependency structures of Europe towards the United States are very high,
Uh-huh.
especially in three things: military, NATO, GAFA, Google, Amazon, all this server sort of thing, and third, currency, yeah, dollar. dollar stable coins and all the new mechanisms which are happening now. So we have three very, very bold past dependencies with the United States. And here I come. If a minute ago I would say that the current EU structure has been destroying the very basements of what Europe was once upon a time, going back to my old map, so the EU would be the origin of the destruction of Europe. Yeah. So what do we take out of this analysis? I mean, first, is it right? This analysis. Second, is there a safeguard? What should Europe do? How could Europe disentangle itself from the EU? Yeah. Which would essentially mean disentangling Europe, or more precisely, disentangling the EU from the GAFA complex of the US, from the dollar, and from NATO. Yeah. Going back to what the map, the Europe on the map does, looking to the Orient, the Arab world, and looking to Russia and Eurasia. Because in the map, the Mrs. Europe stands with her feet on Russian soil. Yeah. So now you look at today's policy. You see this border, NATO border, which cuts Europe into pieces, where the nombril is on the map. Basically the women of the map, of the old map, is to cut her body through her nombril. So the torso goes into the Atlantic. Yeah, I mean, it's very figurative if you transpose current policy structures to this old map, and you see that you just have a part of Western Europe which is drawn to the Atlantic, whereas it should stand and finds its fruitful soil on Russia. So basically, we are doing all things wrong. And if you now, last sentence, if you mention the destructions of the towns, I mean, people saying, how do we live? What are our towns, our suburbans, our regions? It isn't as beautiful as it was. Well, my answer, but many people's answer, is that obviously we do have a sort of refeudalization, or call it oligarchization, in our societies. I mean, this neoliberal 40 years have been totally eroding the republic. The republic, yeah, la république. The republic is that you have a mouvement égalitaire. You have basically everybody's working for the republic. The republic is co-voting and co-working. Yeah, the Republican sort of liberty is a very different liberty than the one in capitalism, where the strongest is the fittest, is the best, and can do what he wants. Yeah, and then buy the state with capital. Basically, that's what we're seeing since decades. Yeah, we see Corona was a good example. Yeah, that the state was providing the billions for having the vaccination. Yeah, it wasn't the invention of BioNTech; it was state money that bought BioNTech vaccines. Yeah, so this erosion of the state, or of the republic through capital, brings what we see. There is polarization between capitals and regions, rural and urban. The urban structures survive. There is Barcelona and Warsaw and whatever, Hamburg, Paris, yeah. And most people see that's quite nice. You have sushi, and you have everywhere you speak English, and then you have whatever, your cup of tea or your coffee shop, yeah. But then again, in the urban structures, I mean, if you travel from Paris to Barcelona to Rome, there's no more difference. It's the same sort of Starbucks coffee shop everywhere. It's the same outfit. The girls look more or less everywhere the same, depending, okay, the hair is darker in the south, but you see my point, yeah? The urban regions are more or less globalized and uniform, and the regions are left behind. Not only left behind in terms of infrastructure, but in terms of bureaucracy, infrastructure. No more postal office, but no more voucher, no more boulangerie, nothing. Yeah. And then comes the migration on top of it. So if you go today to southern countries, in France, for instance, yeah, Côte d'Azur, you see old villages in which you have basically people over 70, old people, or migrants, and nothing else. Yeah. And it's not racist or whatever. I'm not a fascist. I'm not a racist. I'm just doing analysis. What is happening in sociological terms? Yeah. It brings me to the fact that there is a researcher in London today, LSE, London School of Economic, who is doing research which criteria need to be fulfilled for civil war breaking out. Yeah. And he comes to the conclusion. There was an article 3 days ago in the Berliner Zeitung for those people who want to look at this. He comes to the conclusion that Europe today, most EU countries comply with the criteria for civil war definition, yeah? Which means atomization of society, polarization, rich and poor, towns and regions, migrants versus inhabitants, and those going for nationalist solution versus those going for global solutions. Yeah, so you have all features of a totally disparate society in which all sentiments of solidarity, with whom do I feel solidarity? Yeah, for whom would I fight for or give my money? Yeah, are broken. And I think when you describe in your age group, the people who are traveling and who feel like, oh, I remember there was something like Europe, and we had our cinemas, and we had European movies, and we had European coffee, we had Segafredo, not only Starbucks, and we had a town hospital, and not only a huge clinic outside of, and we had a train station, and we had infrastructure and organized villages. Yeah, I mean, community feeling. And then you could say, oh, I'm from Alsace. Oh, I'm from Normandy. Oh, I'm from Rhineland. Okay, I'm from Tyrol, and so on and so forth. And this is gone. And it's a tragedy. I mean, I have been writing a lot about it in my books. And it's a tragedy, and it's interesting to me that you start to sense it, you youngsters, because I was in the belief system that you don't care. But
No,
if
I care tremendously. I mean, right now, when I go to Paris or to Barcelona or to literally any European city, you don't feel safe right now. And that's
yeah,
something that happened the last 5 years or 7 years or whatever. But really, for me, I even made a personal decision. I would never, ever, ever move with my family anywhere outside of Switzerland. Because here in Zurich, I know it's going to be fine. My wife can go out and walk, and I have to worry about nothing. My kids can go play out on the street. Nothing would ever happen. But really, I don't feel that way about Europe in general, and it hurts, because I come from anywhere. I have one grandma from Germany, one from Austria, one grandfather from Sardinia, Italy, another grandfather from France. So I'm like the byproduct of Europe, kind of merged into Switzerland, and it hurts to see that. Really, it does hurt to see that because, yeah, I don't know. It feels like we need to do a 180-degree turn and not just like a slight directional change.
There is obviously a I just was in Zurich end of July. There's obviously a cosmopolitan Zurich. Yeah, but I would say that Switzerland is much better off, but just only delayed in the same process.
I hope not.
You're still good,
Yeah.
only delayed in the same process. Because if you look, I mean, I don't want to detail this too much, but if you look at the Swiss-American relations and what the Swiss banks have been, going through, I mean, there is the same process of deconstruction of Switzerland. Let's say it like this, yeah. And that's why you have already the election, which is the SVP and so on and so forth. And obviously, you're better off because Switzerland is just very, very wealthy. Yeah? You have a lot of money. It's still a lot of money. And you are basically pivotal for what I call the oligarchization of society. Yeah? Switzerland is benefiting from oligarchization. You have the wealthy Russians, you have the wealthy Arabs, you have everybody wealthy in your country. I was just staying in Schweizerhof at Zurich train station, yeah, and the morning in the lobby you just had wealthy Arab families. There were nobody like me, yeah, in the Schweizerhof. So I agree that it's all fine for you, but if we are now trying to detect processes of globalization, atomization and polarization and what happens in societies, then I would argue Switzerland is better off for now, but in the same sort of sucked into the same global process. And the global process has much to do basically with dollar supremacy and basically with, let's call it capitalist structures of the modern Northern Hemisphere, yeah, which are not Swiss traditions neither. I mean, the Swiss have Vollgeld-Initiativen. The Swiss have initiatives for federal structures. The Swiss are many anthroposophen in, yeah. You have all these peasants in Switzerland. I mean, there is a lot of Rudolf Steiner, Dreiteiligkeit and so on and so forth. So Switzerland is a society which has roots for, Rütlischwur, which has roots of federation, which has root of the money goes from down to up and so on and so forth. So Swiss has a vivid democracy, yeah. So Swiss is not an oligarchic society in its essence, yeah. So I feel like the corruption of the Swiss society is also ongoing, but that's why I go back to my European map. Res Publica, the Republic, Eidgenossenschaft, you could also say Eidgenossenschaft Schweiz, yeah, which is a sentiment. Then there is Rousseau. Rousseau came from Switzerland, right? Rousseau, you can say he invented the French Revolution on its own, yeah. But there is an egalitarian, anti-oligarchical momentum in the way that, including Switzerland, Europeans will run their economies, yeah. Also, if you go Christianity, I mean, we have images of Franz von Assisi, which is a bless on poverty, which is we help the poor, which is, I mean, the Catholic Church is not the evangelic church where they pray for being a millionaire, yeah. The Catholic Church is rather the opposite. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So there is a civilizatory sort of way of, even if you go back to the origins of capitalism, modern capitalism, it has been invented in the monasteries, with the beer brewing of the monks. So it was then Rockefeller sort of, I can, you can't, and if I can, you don't interest me, and I don't give you health care. I mean, the society where everybody's on its own and everybody think. I mean, even now the billionaires class in the United States who think that they can build, how do you call this, bunker and survive Third World War, I mean, this idea, the sheer idea that you're not depending on other living men, yeah, can buy everything with money is, I think, alien or is strange to European minds throughout centuries. Yeah, it's not trivial that Christianity has been invented, in the year zero in Rome as an anti-oligarchic sort of system, because everybody is a child of God. So there is this egalitarian moment, you understand? Because in the ancient Roman Empire was Alexander the Great, who was oligarchic too. Yeah. So I think we could do, and there is also a very interesting Dutch author. Yeah. He has written a capital about a book, I think is called Sovereign Capital in the US, but I can send you the book, and then you can read it in it's a Dutch author, yeah. He makes the biggest distinction between Europe and the US on this oligarchy versus egalitarian mentality, or capitalist versus republican, or sovereign capital versus sovereign state. And sovereign capital, Wall Street versus sovereign state, and sovereign states are constituted as republics, res publica, in order to promote the common good in Europe. Yeah. So if we go down these routes of analysis, and I think they're very important and very especially important for the next generation, if you do not want to have these towns which resemble one to the other, Roma to Barcelona to Paris, and all these towns are coming down in terms of civilization and what they can offer, and we do not want the dying regions and this dying peri-urbain, banlieues and so on and so forth, we need to rethink these concepts of communities, of what a mairie is, of service public, of what is a state function to hold a community. Yeah. And is a thinking, and that thinking is now very strong. You told me you are working in AI, yeah, or in digital. Peter Thiel and the whole sort of GAFA bubble, yeah. I mean, there is this libertarian tendency. Yeah. And it's very important to understand that libertarian, whatever it means, it's not really clear what it means. Yeah. But if it means something, sort of everybody on its own, be the strongest, buy your bitcoins, I have nothing to do with the rest of the world sort of thing. Yeah. And then Argentina is taking the model. I can tell you that the Argentines, they're not happy these days. Yeah. They're all not happy about this trend. Yeah. Because it's a dollarization of Argentina. It's a strangling Argentina, whatever. But the GAFA complex, the Bitcoin thing, the libertarian spirit, which is imploding societies, on top transhumanism, and on top religious overload, because Peter Thiel basically put religion into the GAFA sort of California thing. Where are we ending up? And so, if you ask me, the survival modus or the analysis what Europe beyond the EU should do, we need to rethink our culture. What is our culture? Where do we come from? And culture is culture and economic culture. How do we produce goods for people? Yeah. And I think that's not done like this. I think we need 25 years. There's really, like what they did in the 12th century, when they all would go back to Thomas von Aquin, and they would the monks would rewrite the old text, the ancient text, and they needed 300 years to rework intellectually the texts where we come from, and then came a Renaissance. So it's a huge intellectual work. I don't think that AI can do this work. I think we need to do it on our own. But it starts with culture, and culture is a lot. It's art culture. It's art, but it's also eating culture. It's a society that has a culture, how to behave, how to be punctual, how to work, how to be, have a protocol, society, and so on and so forth. We lost all of this. And I think that is what young people now realize, that all this, I have tennis shoes and I'm in a jogging and I speak English and Starbucks is fine and I will do my writing and I have an AI bot who does my agenda, that this is hollowed out, totally hollowed out, without culture and without soul and without l'esprit. Everything is hollowed out. So if you ask me, Europe needs to find again its spirit.
Yeah, and you can really look towards the US. I was just there 3 or 4 months ago, and it's even worse than by most European cities, really. It's much worse. And if I hear you correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, kind of we have a trend in the US, which has probably been going on already for, 20, 30 years, whatever. And this is now kind of happening in Europe as well. So we're really a bit too close with the US and kind of copying that and under this influence with the dollarization and so on. And Switzerland is kind of also within that, and it's kind of following the same pattern, but just a bit later. And quite frankly, I couldn't agree more that we need to change that, because culture is really what makes Europe Europe. When you go to, to Italy and you're on a piazza and drink your wonderful espresso, it's just not the same if you go to an American Starbucks. It really isn't. And that's just one of thousands of examples, And I agree with you, where I think it really comes from the West, from the US, and they, over the last 20 years, it kind of was this influence where we ended up here.
Can we stay there?
Yeah.
First, there's no such thing than the West. The West is an invention, and it's an invention of the US in order to make Europe for use for itself. The West is finished. There is I can't remember the Indian name, but there is an Indian author, if you go Google, who just wrote a book, Why the World Will Survive the End of the West. So for the rest is already finished. Go to South Africa, to India, ask Brazilians, ask Russians. The West is our invention, and the only ones who are sticking still to the illusion of the West is us. Yeah. So the West never was something, and at least it was never a cultural basement. What it was a security alliance, NATO. The West is NATO, so countries in NATO are the West, yeah? And then that goes from Turkey to New Zealand to Australia to Italy. So what is this as a cultural underpinning, yeah? So the West is finished. And if it ever had existed, it was a tool for a security alliance, but nothing else. The moment we realize this, we would realize that in cultural terms, I already talked a lot about the cultural alienation and differences between the US oligarchy versus republic, and so between the US and Europe. But go for other things. Go evangelic and Christian, yeah, I already said, but death capital punishment, yeah. Capital punishment in Europe, no. In the US, yes. Yeah, there is so much in terms of philosophy. What is the role of the I? What is the role of the we? What is the state? Was it, I mean, in terms of there was never a workers' revolution. I mean, the best thing they ever had was Roosevelt for 10 years. Yeah, so the whole structure of the American society is totally different, and still we think we should copy them. So the real question is, why should we copy them? I mean, I have been working for the German Marshall Fund of the United States. I've been, I don't know how many dozen times in the US, and I was not only New York, Washington, I also was in Phoenix and in Atlanta, in whatever, Missouri, everywhere. Yeah. And the rural-urban divide in the US is outrageous. Yeah, I mean, there are many books written about this. George Pecker, for instance. Yeah, George Pecker wrote a book 10 years ago, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. What's the book again? My America I Lost or something, yeah, George Becker. But he described how the American agriculture was totally, only technology. Also they lost their communities, they lost their molkeries, they lost their, I mean, there's no more handcrafting in the United States. It's only huge agricultural surfaces, yeah. And then you have Los Angeles and New York, and that is it in essence. Yeah. And so you see the polarization of the society in the political polarization, which is Republicans and Democrats, and that's it. Yeah. The multi-culti Democrats in New York, and in Idaho, you have the rednecks of the Republicans. Yeah. But here's the thing, which is in terms of civilization and culture even more important. We need, I think, to realize. So I already said the West is finished. It never existed. Yeah. But the US, superpower since 80 years, not 100 years, First World War. Yeah. Wilson, say 100 years, 110 years, which have a power projection. They project power and they project the dollar. That's the only way they exist. They project the GAFA, they project the dollar, and they project military. Yeah. And it's only because they can project these things and everybody is still buying dollars. That's why the BRICS countries want to de-dollarize. Yeah. It's but de-dollarization is not so easy, because you need to, what is the basis of your BRIC currency? Is it gold? But then the US has the most gold reserves. So it's not so easy. Yeah. But the whole world is now working on de-dollarization. Yeah. In essence, the US is the only superpower, modern superpower, that is not a civilization. The Iranians, the Persisches Reich, the Indians, the Chinese, the Russian Empire, the Europeans, Roman Empire, even if you go back, Egypt, Roman, and you say Jerusalem, Rome, Athens were the three towns that made Europe. You have civilizations that are between 2,500 and 5,000 years. Yeah, from Europe to China to Persia, however you count it. Yeah, even the Maya, the Inca in Latin America, you have civilizations, and they all had a living time of, say, 3,000 to 5,000 years. The only political superpower that the whole world is, submitted to, in a way, yeah, because it's not only us, it's also the Arab countries, democracy promotion. Look what the Americans did in the Arab world. Yeah, do look at what they do in Asia, Indonesia after World War II, and so on and so forth. So there is a superpower that is no civilization, and that is interesting. Yeah, I mean, interesting in itself, because then the rescue is perhaps, why is this so, and why the other civilizations must refind, in the multipolar world of the 21st century, their civilizatory embedment to basically rule a multipolar world. Yeah, I mean, I think there's really something to find, and then we would need to look at what could Europe bring to the table. We invented diplomacy. We did the Westphalian Peace in 1648, which is basically today's Völkerrecht, I mean international law. Today's UN law is basically Westphalischer Frieden 1648. Yeah. So, and we in Europe, we know what a balance of power system is. We always had the Ottoman and the Russian Tsar and the French kings and the German Kaiser, whatever, and then the British Empire. So we know what an equilibrium is, but we don't do power projection. and we don't do military military protection. Okay, in the Middle Ages, okay, colonialism, yeah, different thing. I do not want to wipe this out, but the way that the Americans do power projection, I think this is in contradiction to what the Chinese do, which is a very soft power sort of thing in Africa, building bridges, building airports, which is not a European thing, which is not what Iran, Persian does. It's not what Russia does. Everybody thinks that Putin is imperial, yeah? But if there's one country out there that is imperial, they're probably more the US than Russia, right? So I think we have to look at this. Why is it so that all the civilizations who I think have an ambition for a multipolar world now and want to make this work, why they are all hanging sort of around the US, which is the only country that in essence has no civilizatory or cultural basement. You know this very beautiful film, Ein Sommer in Amalfi, A Summer in Amalfi. It's a film based on a writing of Oscar Wilde. And it plays in Amalfi, which is southern Italy, in 1929. And then there are two Italians, smoking a cigar in, a very sort of nice hotel, coastal hotel. And the one says to the other, "What do you have against the Americans? It's the only country that went straight from barbary to decadence without ever striving for culture." So, you know what? There is something in, yeah? So
Yeah.
some Malfi. It's and I'm not saying this. I mean, I should strengthen it. I'm not saying it because I'm anti-American. I've been so many times there. There's so many smart people. That is the good side. So many Americans now want to overcome NATO. There is a movement, World Beyond War. There is an anti-NATO movement in the US. You go back to ancient structures of, for instance, economic models. All the ancient civilizations are based on community building. That's how the Chinese run the country today, yeah? Because they nivelize and they equalize, because you need state impact if you want to feed 1.4 billion people per day. That doesn't function like I'm the best and I take it all and I don't give you some rice. You need some state structures, yeah? So my argument would be, if we want to reinvent Europe, we start with culture. We bring to the party what we can bring, which is balance of power and diplomacy. And we would be, if we could prepare a multipolar world and convince the Americans to come to this multipolar world without being Pax Americana, that we as Europeans, with our cultural traditions, we would be having more in cinch and in share or in common with most of the ancient civilizations, because we are one old civilization, our own, in a way.
But how do we end up here? Because you mentioned in the beginning, right? The kind of Europe is this woman looking down to Russia, right? And or
Standing with her.
exactly, kind of trying to get there, or actually at least work together. But right now, I mean, everything you said, honestly, I couldn't agree more, quite frankly. And I think a lot of people resonate with that, that the US needs to go, back into reality, that they will not be the kingdom for the next thousands of years. Just, the BRICS states are too strong, and there will be many, many more that challenge that, And so either they accept that, or it will really end up in a conflict. But to me, it sounds like it's kind of a bit, we're stuck, right now in Europe. I really see, and also in the US, I see more warmongers than people who actually want to change it, And I see more people who kind of use the mainstream and the media and all of that for purposes rather than guns, because what they should be projecting is kind of this message with what you were saying now, that, we need to come together around culture, around many other things, but it's all in this hyper polarized world, It also goes in Europe, unfortunately. And I really wonder, how did we end up here? That we have the West, which doesn't exist, we just learned, right? But US and Europe, really, most of the people so incredibly fiercely uniting against Russia, against many other states as well, right? To me, it just doesn't sound productive at all. Like, it sounds the much worse alternative what we're doing now, than just
Yeah.
coming together and working together and just saying, hey, look, I might have fucked up here, you might have fucked up here, but now let's stop the dying, especially in the Russia-Ukraine war, because I think last thing I heard is like 7,000 people a week are dying, something like that, some ridiculous amount.
1.6 million are the secret figures, yeah.
Like, that's incredible.
In that sense, I think you are doing with your podcast a very productive work, because if you told me that most things I told are in resonance with you, and you think that most people watching this podcast would be in resonance, hopefully, with it, then resonance is it. Resonance is it, yeah? It's basically like a chorus, yeah? If we can get in resonance and we make it loud and louder and louder, this resonance or this tonation, here's the A, yeah? That will be it. At the end, that will be it. I'm not saying that we will need to go through a war before, because other people have decided that this war, arms industry has decided that they want these weapons, they want the money, and so on and so forth. And it has always been so, yeah? let's not fool around. We are not defending values in Ukraine. Ukraine is neither liberal nor parliamentarian nor nothing, yeah? It's just like BlackRock has not yet earned enough, and the agricultural
Money.
are not yet distributed, and so on and so forth. And it was so in the First World War, and so it was in the Second. So it's all about territories, about oil, resources, raw earth, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So other people, whoever the BlackRocks and the Vanguards people are, who and then the Bourse stock market want war, and then the press writes war, and because the press writes war, there is propaganda at work. There is propaganda at work. We need to realize that there is NATO also Russian propaganda. Obviously, yeah, cyber war is. But we have ideologisierte, how do you say, ideologized or propaganda?
Well, that's a good question in English. I know exactly what you mean, but I couldn't say it myself in English.
Ideologisierte Gesellschaft. So, all this kriegstüchtig sort of saying in Germany, and you have it at every bus station, is a way to is a way of propaganda, yeah. And the rest is a mass behavior of societies. Karl Kraus has been written in Weltbühne in the 1930 about it. Die Fackel, Karl Kraus, Canetti, all these people, yeah, basically saying that if there's a mass formation, it means there's a collective fear, and then you are told you need to defend, and you need to defend your fatherland, and if you're not doing this, you are ein Verräter, you are the traitor, and then the mass is against you. This is all about psychological processes, and we are in these processes. I organized many peace demonstrations in Germany, and now you have 7,000 people or 10 or 15 max people at a peace demonstration, where you should say we should be, half of Germany should be defending peace, because we are the first, in all these whatever. We will be the pivotal country in this war happening, yeah, with the tanks going through the whatever. Yeah, I hope it will not happen. So it's about psychology, and I don't know who has been decided that this should start in 29. That's what we are now telling. Yeah, in 2 or 3 years, Putin will attack, whatever, and so we need to be rearmed by then. It's totally stupid to say, okay, Putin will wait until Europe is rearmed. Why should Putin wait until 2029? But there is this 29 date up to which they are pursuing this war. So look back in time. Last time, it was 12 years. Started roughly 33, 45, out of which 6 years were the real hot war, 39, 45. Yeah. So the preparation, the mass preparation, and then the war. I do hope personally that we can avoid it, because it would really silly if Europe needs the third experiences of what we, when we are done, always say never again, never again, never again. Yeah. On the other hand, it seems to be as if there are generational things that each generation needs to do on its own. There is this theory that you have a war generation, and then the children of the war generation, and then the little children, the grandchildren of the war generation. I'm grandchildren of a war generation, born in 64. Yeah. So my mother was a war child, and then there was a war generation. Yeah. From me to my children, I have 2 sons. They are 31 and 34. The war is not existing. there is something in this war is far away. It won't affect me. There is something apparently that a society needs to experience each generation on its own to then say again, never again. It's a little bit like the Peter Seeger song, yeah. Where have all the flowers gone? I mean, everybody knows this song, yeah, with the flowers on the grave and so on and so forth. I don't know whether this is the human tragedy, yeah, but what I know, again, coming back to being constructive, if you look at the writings of those building Europe in the 1920s and 30s, the smart people would know the war is coming. Stefan Zweig, Julien Benda, French intellectual, liberal intellectual, wrote a Discours à la nation européenne in 32, when everything was already very loud and Nationalsozialismus and Fascismus in Italy. Yeah, so that was the moment where he wrote a very smart, very lovely text, yeah, very cheering up. Rede an die europäische Nation, Discours à la nation européenne, la nation européenne. Hein? Donc, what I'm saying is, if you then go back to what happened in the 1950, when we really built Europe, Hertenstein and Kohle und Stahl and everything, coal and steel, whatever took then place. There is a lot of historical research now that Jean Monnet was also teleguided by the Americans, and it was, so there is new historical research which shows that it was not so rosy building the cozy Europe, but there was American influencing and sphere, so on. So I do not want to deny this, but what I want to say is that the European structures emerging after World War II were intellectually born in the 1920s and the 1930s. So what we do today in 2025, if we assume, and if unfortunately there would be war 29 for 2 or 3 years, because I don't know, Mr. Merz, Zelensky, BlackRock, whoever want this war, and you and I and others can't avoid it, yeah? I'm very sure that still the work we do now, which is creating resonance for what we want then, is the most important thing to do. So if you cannot avoid what is happening, what you can do is build the future. And that is what I am trying to do, what you are probably doing with your podcast, designing the future. And, may I say this? If you don't have an idea for the future will not happen. So the most important thing is that we have an idea for Europe for the moment we know that the moment is now. Let me explain. I'm German. I was told for 40 years, German unification. It was totally annoying because we were told every year, next year's German unification, and it never happened, right? Most people in Germany would still have said on the 8th of November in 89, when will German unification happen? We would say never, yeah? And then the wall came down like this. And nobody expected it to come down this day, right? Then we had unification. Why we had unification? Because we told so 40 years before. The moment it happens, we will do unification. And this, my opinion, is why the two-state solution, there were all this Neue Forum, Bärbel Bohley, they said, okay, the wall is down, but we want to keep 2 German states, yeah? There was a real political sort of thing here, yeah? But this solution didn't do it because the narrative, what should happen if ever the wall comes down, was unification. So what is my point here? The most urgent and important thing we have to do is to have a vision for Europe, say 2049, one generation ahead, 25 years, 2049. There's 1949, 2049. The world will be totally different. I bet the UN in its existing form is not there. Many countries won't be there. New countries might be there. Borders will have changed, blah, blah, blah. Technology, transhumanism, take II, we don't know. Yeah. Which world is this? And do we have a projection power, une pouvoir prospective what is the European civilization in this multipolar world? What do we want to bring to the party? Where do we want to stand? That's the most important intellectual, emotional, and analytical work we have to do. And the problem is, my feeling, that today too many people are stuck. You said stuck. We are stuck. Yes, we are stuck. Yeah. And too many people are, oh, Mrs. von der Leyen and the EU and Digital Service Act, and it's all bad. Yes, it is all bad. Yeah. But let the system die on its own. It will. People, I mean, systems are like people. Systems who don't function don't survive, as men who don't function, the heart is broken, don't survive. Yeah. So I am not interested in, yelling at the EU and Madame von der Leyen and what she does wrong again in Washington and Alaska. And, I mean, it's totally absurd what the EU is doing. But I have a certain trust that the EU will not survive because it is in betrayal of its own intellectual basements. It has told us it's a story beyond war, yeah, and beyond nation state. That was the 80-year narrative, yeah. Nie wieder Krieg, never again war, and Europe beyond nation state was the story. Yeah. Now we see the story was not given. And so I think the EU as an institution will not survive the betrayal of its own story. So I couldn't care less what happens to the EU. But we need to define and to paint it, like architects, before they build a house, they have a little, they make it, out of wood or what, the little, how do you call it? Diese kleinen Modelle, yeah, die Architekten bauen. So we need to have the model for Europe we want. And Switzerland, actually, that's why, I have written my little utopia, the European Republic, and it's based basically Europe as a big Switzerland, Europe as a Eidgenossenschaft, Europe as a republic, Europe built bottom up, going back to Hertenstein, Europe being neutral, Europe looking Orient, Europe reconciliation with Russia. I mean, the elements are pretty clear. Yeah. So we have the elements. And if we have the elements and we now start to have people who resonate around these elements just because we are talking about them now, then a first step, I think, is done.
I hope we can get there just without war. This is what I'm afraid, because it looks a bit right now. I mean, I fully agree with everything, but it looks a bit right now that it first needs to really break down before you can rebuild it from the ashes. That's really my subjective feeling right now, because I just don't see any efforts to stop the dying and stop the killing and also the money making, right, for this whole machinery. I just don't see it, honestly, on all sides. And I don't know, even though I don't like this subjective feeling, but it's really how it feels, that one day, hopefully we can get there, what you're describing. That would be ideal, hopefully sooner than later. But the big question, I think, is, can we avoid a huge, full-scale, well, probably world war? Because we just don't know what would happen then,
I don't know.
Yeah.
And if you question history in empirical terms, it's fair to say that humanity was never able to prevent war. And that's an empirical finding, yeah. If not, I guess we could have had invented it before. So Europe is a history of wars. Let's not fool around, yeah. And having said this, obviously it would be a tragedy that a third world war, with the Iranian-Israeli dimension and the Chinese-American Taiwan dimension and all these dimensions, Pakistan and Kashmir and whatever, yeah, BRICS against West or whatever would be the scenario. That if we could not avoid it, yeah, I agree. But there is a sense of I mean, I don't know. I don't want to become too metaphysical, yeah. But in a way, something needs to die before a new thing can come. Yeah, this is legal in a way. Yeah. So I don't know whether that also applies for systems, even for world systems. If everybody is now eager to say the world system of 1949 is dead, yeah, can we invent a new world system which is post Pax Americana, which is BRICS, which is X and Y and Z, which is neutral, for instance? Yeah. There is a very good blog by Pascal Lottach, Neutrality Studies. He's Swiss, by the way, sitting in Japan. Yeah. and has a huge global network on neutrality studies. Yeah, what would be neutrality? I mean, it's a very interesting question. What is sovereignty? Yeah, can we invent United Nations beyond nation states? I mean, could we have a global assembly which is citizen based, which is based on equal representation of towns, for instance? Yeah, like the big African or Asian towns. I mean, there are many things we totally need to newly address, I think, and we haven't even talked about robotics and AI and what this transhumanism and what this will do with us. Yeah, so I have no answer to your feeling, which I tend to share, that that the war seems like a catalyst of something new to come. Yeah. Um, if that is so, I don't know. It's certainly not. It's certainly not the case for being agnostic. Yeah, but it's, I guess, helpful in analytical terms. Again, to repeat what I said, if we want to go through it, we need to know the day X, and we will all sense when the day X is. 9th of November was day X. Yeah, nobody knew it before, so we don't shape the day. We don't control the day and the happening, but we control our thinking and what we want. For me, it's the most important thing to say. We control our thinking and what we want. And so the day X, whatever that day X will be, yeah, Alaska or everybody will know, yeah. The first who has an idea that resonates widely in Europe is the good idea. And that is why every effort to feed into this idea, I think, is a very valuable effort. And I'm very pleased that I had the occasion to talk with you and with a very young person in an intergenerational sort of thing here. And because that's now the moment, yeah, also to give a certain idea of Europe into new hands, yeah.
Well, I think there's no better way to end this, honestly. No, it's been really wonderful having you on your show. I must say I learned a lot because I'm usually already a person who's really, well, prolific when it comes to all the world events, what happened, what is going to happen. But today you gave me a couple of new insights, which I'm really grateful for. And there's a lot of more things we could discuss, honestly. I think we could go on for 3 hours, 4 hours, but I think we should keep that for a second part, maybe. That would be lovely. But
Maybe.
yeah, it's been lovely speaking to you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much. Thank you so much. I will be back to Switzerland soon. So Switzerland is core for the design of the new Europe.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Thank you.